The lecture notes and then forgot to make copies and bring them. So if you want them, we'll email it around to you. But again, this one's pretty, I think, a little bit more straightforward. A lot of it's just little tips, and I'll also kind of ask, we have a lot of folks here with a lot of race experience. You can give us your tips of the trade if you want. But I think for a race strategy, and we'll go break these down here in just a little bit, but I think the first thing to decide going into a race is what your goals are, because that's really going to dictate a lot of both your training and what you're going to do during the race. And I just kind of broke it into 3 goals I could think of for a typical race. So one would be just to finish. This is often a goal, like if you've never done a particular race before, like an Ironman or something like that. That might be your goal. If you've done a race before, a goal might be a personal record. So either on the same course or the same distance, can you beat the time you had last time? And then usually people work up, or maybe they just start right out at beating other people and placing. And there, everyone laughs because you know yourself if you're that one. But again, I think you need to be honest with yourself what your goal is, because I think sometimes where people get in trouble is they go in saying their goal is just to finish, and really they start going and they're racing the whole time. And they didn't train at that level. They trained like to finish, and they got in there and decided they're going to race. I didn't do my first Ironman. I did triathlons for about 20 years before I did an Ironman, and the main reason for that was I knew I was just a racer, and I didn't think I could race that long. And I'm still not sure I can. But that was what was always holding me back, was just that distance, and just knowing myself that I get out there and try to go too hard. The next thing, obviously, we have the 4 different distances of triathlon. So then once you decide kind of what your goal is, hopefully you pick the race. And we talked a little bit about training plans and things like that. We'll talk a little bit, there's some different strategies too you might use in a sprint or Olympic versus a half Ironman or Ironman, based on the distances and both the relative distance and the total distance of the different events. So if we look at our first goal, let's say just to finish, my advice here would be to be pretty conservative, especially usually if someone's goal is just to finish something, say probably at least half the time they've never done it before, right? So like they've never done an Ironman and their goal is just to finish it. So here, again, being conservative isn't bad, and you can always pick up the pace a little bit later if you're feeling like really frisky the last 5K or something like that. I think another good thing here is you can't really bike or swim with someone very easily or legally, but you can run with somebody, so I think that'll also help kind of pacing yourself. A lot of people will train together that way. Another thing, I think if your goal is just to finish, and I've done this, the reason there's a ski race up here, this is the Norwegian Birkie. When I went and did that was a race I was just going to finish, right? I was racing 14,000 Norwegians, so they're born with skis on, there's no way I'm going to beat any of them. So here the whole goal was just to enjoy the event, right? So you kind of take mental pictures as you go along and stop every now and then, look around, right? Try to relax and enjoy yourself. I did this with the first Ironman I did too. I was only going to do one, and I was just going to go and enjoy myself and take mental pictures and everything. More on that later. But I think you, again, if that really is your goal, then make it an event and have fun doing it. And again, I wouldn't feel bad about saying that that's your goal. The second goal, now we're getting a little bit more serious on pacing and times and things like that, would be to PR. So PR is personal record. And so here, you're really going to start focusing more on the times, right? So you're going to have particular times and paces in mind. And this is going to dictate now your training, right? So instead of just your training being, can I go the distance, which might have been for the first one, make sure you can do the distance you need to do in all 3 of the events. Here you're going to start having a target time that you want to race at, which means you're going to start doing some of your speed work at that pace or a little bit faster to work your body up to where you can hold that pace during the race. Right? So it's going to start to ramp things up a little bit. The second part of this, so again, you have your target time, that'd be the first step. You train around those target times. The third part is to actually do those target times in the race. Right? I point this out, and I'm laughing at a few people, and myself included. There's a tendency once the race starts to forget what your target times were and usually go a lot faster than those, especially on the run. You'll get off the first mile, you're like 5:40, and you're like, whoops, that's 2 minutes faster than I was supposed to go. Right. So you have to really kind of be honest with yourself on these targets, and you'll find out in your training, right? If you can't train at these paces, you're not going to race at them, right? So train at those paces. If you can train at them and do repeated intervals and stuff, there's a good chance you'll be able to race at them, right? But you're probably not going to race faster than that, most likely. The other thing then, if you're going to really go for a PR, is when you're going to do this, you're going to put your blinders on. You're not going to pay attention to what anyone else in the race is doing. If somebody goes flying by you on the bike, you're going to go, okay, see ya, you know, I'm doing whatever watts I'm supposed to do, or heart rate, or same thing on the run, right? If somebody goes rocketing by you, you're not going to lock onto them and chase them down, right? You're doing your thing, right? Because your thing you've already set, you're racing the clock, right? The other thing I would say is race the course. A lot of times people get kind of fixated on paces and things like that. If it's a hilly course, that may not matter, right? The actual, if you're not, you might not be holding 20 miles on average, 20 miles an hour average on the bike going up a hill, right? You just ignore all that stuff and race the course itself, all right? Does that make sense? Kind of what we're getting at, the couple different levels. So again, and I think this is kind of a logical progression, right? For most people who've never done a triathlon, they're going to start with finish. Once they finished once, their natural thing is going to be the next time, can you beat the time you had before? Right? The third one is the one we'll spend most of the rest of the time on, and the tips you can get on this one will apply to the other two as well. But this is usually where most people wind up after they've done a couple triathlons is, you know, at some point you're PRing or you've done the race a couple times, you know you're going to finish it, right? That's not the issue. You start working more on placing. So you want to take home some of these really cool beer mugs that they give out. All right. So here we'll break this into the different parts. So we'll talk a little bit about the swim, bike, and the run. But the kind of the take-home message here now is your clock might be a useful tool for pacing and things like that, but really now you're going to start racing people, right? So you don't really care necessarily what your time is. Now you are chasing people down, right, at different points in the race. So the mentality is going to shift a little bit, right? You might still be trying to PR, but again, that might only be if there's no one around you at the end and there's nothing left to do. You might as well just look at the watch and try to PR. But otherwise, the focus is going to be a little different. All right. So this is what you're going to look like. So your base work here is getting your momentum up, your speed work, you're doing all these little flippy twirls. And the goal on race day is to stick the landing, right? So the idea here is you've done all this work, all this training, all these cool aerobatics. Okay, we don't do this. But anyway, the goal here is now to make it all just come together just right at the very end. That's going to be race day. All right, so to do this, we talked about all the training plans and all that kind of stuff earlier on. So going into the race, we're kind of done with the main part of our training. We've done all of our periodization and our intervals and all of that. We're going to now go into what we call a taper phase. So you're going to taper down before the race, and you'll see all sorts of different things. You can read up all sorts of complicated formulas out there about how much you're supposed to cut things back and all that. If you're a professional athlete, I don't know if anyone here is, but probably not. If you're a professional athlete, they're actually probably only going to drop it about 20 or 30% a week, and another 20 to 30% the next week. But they're also not working, right? So they're gonna when they're not training, they're going to be sitting on the couch with their feet up, you know, relaxing. For the rest of us, we're working. So if I go into a taper, I actually cut my training volume even more. So I like about 50%. So cut your volume in half, and then cut it in half again, because you're still up running around 40 hours a week doing your job, right, most likely. If you're on vacation for the week before, you could cut back a little bit less and train more if you want. And again, you should just kind of play around with this and find out what works for you. But usually for a taper, 1 to 2 weeks for a sprint or an Olympic race would be good. 2 to 3 weeks usually for a half Ironman or Ironman. So this would mean, like, let's say I was training 10 hours a week for a sprint triathlon. Usually I would probably just taper for about a week. So like the week before the race, I might cut it down to about 5 hours, and then I'd race that weekend, right? Or if you're doing an Ironman and you were up at, like, say, you know, we'll just say 16 hours, just to make the math easy, you could cut it down to like 8 and then 4 and then race, right? So you're cutting the total volume down, so your body is getting to relax. It's getting to rest a bit. The other key here, though, is you're going to decrease the volume. And the volume is really, in some ways, kind of what tires you out a little bit, just being on your feet or on your bike that many hours a week. But you want to keep up the intensity, right? So you want to keep doing the interval work, right? So you're going to drop the big long runs and the long bike rides, the 3-hour, Durathon-y things. But you're going to keep up with some of the intervals. Right? Just for an example, like I'm training for the God Energy Olympic race, so I've been doing, in running right now, I'm doing 800, so half mile, basically 800 meter. I'll do them again this week, but then next week I'll drop down to 400s and probably the week before 200s, right? So I'm actually going to even shorten the distance I'm going to do my intervals. So the idea is to keep your speed up, because that's what I want for the race, but shorten the duration of them, right? So you get more rest time, more recovery time. And then the other thing is nutrition and rest. And again, with nutrition, I'll go into this in just a second. This doesn't mean pigging out, right? So carb loading, you're going to really saturate your carb levels in about a day or two in terms of your glycogen stores. So you don't need to carbo load for a week. At some point, those extra calories will just get turned into fat, which isn't going to be as useful on race day. So tapering doesn't include totally pigging out. The other tip I would make, again, going into the race, is to kind of think through what you're going to bring and what you're going to have on race day. I think I've seen people bring, not quite this bad, but a little bit excess gear. So really just, I'm a minimalist when it comes to triathlon in terms of just exactly what I'm going to need. I'm not going to, anything I know I'm not going to use isn't going to be there. Everything should fit in one bag. Excess nutrition, and we'll get to that on the next slide, but I think sometimes people either carry too much on the bike. You'll see folks on a sprint triathlon with the race belt with all the blue bottles and this kind of stuff. Right? You're just not going to use that, right? I think even extra water bottles, any of that kind of stuff. Any other excess weight that you can take off the bike or yourself is good. Any other baggage, emotional or otherwise, right? Just get rid of all of that before the race, right? You're just going to be focused on that one thing, right? So this is not the time to be planning your next week or next workout or being in a fight with somebody, right? Nope. Right, so you got to just totally zone all that other stuff out. All right, so for nutrition, I know we talked, for some of you who were here earlier, we talked about this before, but if you weren't here earlier, I think you can, well, I know you can mess up a race on bad nutrition. I've done it myself many times. So it's actually, I think you can keep it pretty simple, and I would do pretty much the same thing if I was doing a sprint race or an Ironman in terms of what I'd be eating both before, definitely before the race and that morning. The only thing that might change would be what I'd be eating during the race, between the two different races. So no matter what I'm doing, I'd probably do the same thing up to about here. So the day, 2 days before the race or 3 days before is the best time to be loading up on what we always think of as carbo loading, so your complex carbohydrates, so starches, things like that. These are going to take a little while to break down, get into your bloodstream, get into your muscles. I've read before, and I prefer this myself as well, if you're going to do a big carb meal, a big bowl of spaghetti at 8 o'clock the night before the race is not such a great idea. If you can have it the day before that at lunch, that's actually ideal, because then it's going to be mostly through your system. By the time you go to bed, you're not going to be laying there in bed with this big bowl of pasta in your stomach. All right. So I think eating it earlier in the day and also 2 days before the race are the best. The day before, I always think of as just kind of packing away all the little nooks and crannies with any salts or sugars that you can fit in there. And salt and sugar will help you also retain water. All right, so they're actually, you can think of that as, instead of like a camel back, it's a camel belly or something like that. Right, you're going to have salt and sugar in there, and water is going to stay in there. So that's like carrying extra water. Right, it's going to help hydrate your body as well. One that I like is V8 juice, or if you can do Mike's method with pickle juice, if you can drink that. But that's a good way to get salt in that you can consume it. You wouldn't be able to just eat if you tried to eat a tablespoon or teaspoon of salt or something like that, you'd probably gag. But there are some foods that you can actually handle quite a bit of salt. And this time of year, when it starts getting warm, I actually have a can of vegetable juice or V8 juice or whatever in the fridge, and just anytime, like once a day, just take a glass of that, and you're going to make sure you're keeping plenty of salt if you're out sweating a lot. For sugars, again, you can do really easy to digest complex carbs like white rice or something like that, or this is a good time for Gatorade, those types of things. Again, these are going to be real simple sugars that are going to be absorbed, and you know you're going to have saturated your body with all the carbs it can handle. And really, this is going to get you through most of the race. Definitely for a sprinter and Olympic, you can do that pretty much just on this, and maybe a little bit for breakfast. But that's about as much as your body will take up. Right? It'll only hold about 500 grams of carbohydrate as glycogen, and anything beyond that is just going to turn it into fat. So there's no point doing this for a week. Right? Your body, you're going to have totally saturated your body's ability to store carbohydrate, and it'll automatically turn it into fat. For breakfast, again, I keep it pretty simple no matter what distance I'm doing. So I usually do energy drink, some kind of Cliff Bar or something like that, and a banana. On a sprint, you probably don't need those calories, but what will happen is your stomach doesn't like being empty, and it'll send grumbly signals to your brain, and you don't want those weird communications going on. Right? So having a little something in your stomach's good, and you can play around that. Some people could probably just get by just a banana and energy drink and nothing more. Right? But having something in your stomach is a good idea. Because you have fasted, you haven't eaten anything for like 12 hours. Right? Do this about 2 hours before the race if you can. Probably not any longer would hurt, but you don't want to be doing this like a half hour before you start to swim. Okay, so during the race for a sprint or Olympic, I would keep it really simple. So just maybe a gel or energy drink, something like that. I don't even carry a water bottle anymore in a sprint. This is one of those things. I've taken lots of water bottles on free little bike rides and never touched them. I might carry a bottle on an Olympic, but again, that's up to you. I would find out what you need, but usually the bike is short enough and they'll have a water station right when you start the run. You can just take a swig and go. For half Ironman and Ironman, here it does become all about eating. Right? Because you're past the 2 to 3 hour stage, you've used up all your glycogen stores, and so what you're racing on after about 2 hours is what you eat. Right? So you're really racing on what you're eating while you're on the bike and on the run. And you can't absorb as much as you're burning. Right? So at some point you're going to start going into a deficit. You'll probably start breaking down muscle. This is why these races hurt a lot, and they take a couple weeks to recover from. You've basically gone into calorie debt. Right? The only two options you can't really eat more. If you could eat more, but it would just sit in your stomach. It wouldn't get absorbed and start getting gassy. Or you can slow down, right? Which neither of those are good options, right? You don't want to slow down. So you can eat. You can usually drink about 1 bottle of water, about 800 mils to a liter of water. You can probably take up in an hour. 200 to 300 calories is probably about as much as you're going to absorb. You can absorb a little bit more on the bike than on the run. But that'd be about 2 to 3 gels. What I was doing for Ironman was about a bottle of fluid, 3 gels, and a gram of salt, which is 3 salt tablets an hour. And you don't want to skip the early ones. So even though you're burning carbs, still glycogen, let's say, the first couple hours on the bike, you want to be eating all this stuff there to kind of stretch that glycogen out as long as you can. All right, so don't skip early aid stations. Anytime you see the last aid station is probably the one you can skip because you're going to be finished by the time that gets in your blood system. All right, so you want to make sure you hit the early ones. Any questions on? Some of this was reviewed. You've seen it, but now you've seen it twice.
I actually have a question on the tapering. So what would happen if you quit training completely? Will that really negatively affect your race?
I don't think so. No. I mean, ideally, what you're trying to do is kind of keep the muscle memory going, and it's kind of like warming up, getting your muscles all warmed up and stuff before going out on a run. I think it's just kind of keeping that going. But I think it would actually be better if you had to have a choice between training hard right before the race and not doing anything. I would say don't do anything. You're probably better off with that. And just make sure you warm up well. But most things any training plan you see will have some kind of tapering in it, usually. They won't just have you go cold turkey for a week. So if you have a choice, this is probably the best. And again, if it's not an important race for you, if you're just using it for training, you can train right through it. Just treat it as a long workout. I don't do those so much anymore because they're expensive. Okay. So if we break down the different events, for swimming, again, if you think of the order of events, you get swim, bike, run. So swimming's going to be first. There's the classic saying, you're not going to win a triathlon on the swim, right? You be the first one out of the water. You're only about a tenth of the way through the race. But they say you can lose it. I'm not even sure for most of us you can lose it, but you, probably for like folks who are Olympic swimmers, or I guess you could not finish that. But for the Olympic guys, they definitely want to be right on the feet of the leaders coming out of the water. But I think for most of us, the main thing with the swim is going to be kind of more of a mental thing, getting through it, especially open water swim in crowds. We're pretty banged together in there. So some of the things that you can think about race day for swimming, it's usually what you would call self-seating. So if you know you're a slower swimmer, you might want to get in the back. You can decide if you're an innie or an outie. I'm not talking belly buttons here, but like if this is the race line going out here and you're going to turn, this is Lake Neshonoc, you're going to turn cutting back this way. Obviously the straightest path is going to be right along the buoys, so that's where it's going to be the most crowded. If you know you're a faster swimmer, you might be able to start right on the buoys because you know you're going to get out in front of everybody, you're going to have clean water to swim in. If you're a little bit slower swimmer, you might actually want to line up on the outside. You might swim a little bit further, but you're going to probably have more open water all the way down. You're not going to get boxed in against the buoys. I think Ron did an interesting analysis of this for Ironman. He did the math, being an engineer, and figured out the advantages of starting near shore versus right out on the buoy line.
It was like an Ironman from the corner buoy all the way to shore is about, I think I figured it was about 200 yards or so, 250 yards. And that first turn is almost a half mile away. And so I figured out if you actually started on shore and swam to the corner versus starting right on the buoy line and went the shortest distance, the difference was about probably 30 feet, 35 feet, which is about 6 or 8 strokes. And if you started on that inside line and got boxed in, and started getting hit, getting the dogs knocked off, you had to stop even for 10 seconds. You would have lost everything you tried to gain. You could have started on the outside, you would have gotten it quicker, and you just stopped in place.
Everybody with that. So yeah, so even though you're swimming a little further, if you got good clean water, you're not getting boxed in. You might actually be faster. Even if you're not faster, you might be happier, which is a big part of getting through the swim. Mentally, right. Mentally, the swim, I think, has more of an effect on people psychologically than physically in terms of what it takes out of you. Pacing, you'll hear different strategies on this. Some people, if they're strong swimmers, say they go out the first 50 all out and try to get some open water and then relax into a nice rhythm. If you know that you're going to hyperventilate doing that and it's going to mess up the rest of your swim, don't do it. Just, again, start on the outside, get into your nice rhythm, and go. So, again, that's something where you're going to have to judge your own level on that. The final one I'm going to mention, this is one I think you need to practice a lot. You can get a wetsuit, which will cut time off your swim. You can practice doing all sorts of intervals and, speed yourself up 10%. If you get in the open water swim and you start going like this and you swim 10% further than everybody else, you just erased all that hard work and nice expensive wetsuit you bought. So one of the hardest things to do, I think, in an open water swim is to swim straight. And there are some drills you can do to practice this in the pool. Obviously, practicing in open water is the best. But you can swim in the lane. Hopefully you're the only one in the lane with your eyes closed, right? And then only open them when you spot. So when I mean spotting, it's you're swimming along and every now and then you just pop your head up and look. And then you have your eyes closed, pop up and look. Right? And you'll find out about how often you have to spot before you're bumping into a lane line or something, right? So, and that's pretty good. For most folks, it's going to be about every other breath or so. You can practice alternate side breathing. So you breathe on the right side and then breathe on the left. That'll help straighten you out a little bit. It'll even out your stroke. So if you a lot of times when people take a breath, their arm dives a little deeper and it causes them to curve a little. By alternating which side you're breathing on, it'll help straighten you out a little bit. So again, just a couple tricks to practice to get good at this, but I think, again, swimming in a straight line, you wouldn't run like this, right? Anybody would know not to do that. And it's just hard to tell in the water, right? Because you can't see the bottom. There's no lane line or anything like that. The first time you try closing your eyes, it feels really weird when you try. How many have you guys done that? Swim with your eyes closed? Yeah. It feels really weird. When you go to swim in Lake Neshonoc, it'll actually feel normal because you can only see about that far anyway. So it's practically you're swimming with your eyes closed. So, yeah. All right. Any other open water swim tips? Yeah.
Well, if they depends on the topography out in front, then you also, as far as sighting, you look to see what's on the horizon
Sure.
as far as if there's
Yep.
trees, a big tree,
Yep.
a little tree, so that when you pop your head up, you always try to, okay, there's a low tree or whatever, or I always want
Sure.
to keep that one low spot in front of me.
Yeah, so here you might be looking for that little bump there in the trees.
Something like that.
Helpful
That way
spot.
you always have something. Yeah, the buoys, a lot of times when you're down water level and people are slushing around, you can't always see that buoy.
Right.
The other thing too is, of course, counting how many buoys you have to your turn, so that as you go down, I got 5 or I got 6. I mean, if you are lucky enough to be able to catch the buoys, then mentally you can also
Know how far to go.
determine where you're at and how you feel.
Actually, that reminds me, another trick I use, going around corners when you come up to a buoy, if the buoy's over here on my right, I'll just start breathing on my right. So normally I alternate sides, and I'll just breathe on the right. And that way, every time I'm taking a breath, I'm basically spotting the buoy. And so you can just be spotting the buoy as you turn around it. So if you just breathe on that, basically looking at it each time you go around.
Another thing people do on the buoy turning is coming a little wide and then doing like a corkscrew swim. You're coming out wide and then all of a sudden just kind of roll yourself over and then come back in, switch the angle.
As long as
back.
there aren't too many people there.
Well, who cares?
Yeah, who cares? So what you're getting yourself ready for is basically this. If you go and do kind of mayhem swimming, which I hear they might be getting rid of now with some of the areas.
Yes, they're working on that.
Yeah. That's almost too bad. That was kind of exciting. All right, almost, not quite. Okay. Transition. So you're going to come out of the swim. The one thing to practice on the couple things to practice on the transitions, especially for the coming out on the swim. Go through the transition and make sure from your spot you know where the in and outs are, right? So that when you get there, you just know exactly where to go. Spot where your bike is laid out. Usually for T1, you have your helmet and glasses like laying right on the bike. Helmet's got to be mounted before you go out, and you guys all know this kind of stuff. There will be a mount line, so you have to run your bike like Josh is here to the mount line. You can do it one of two ways. You can either throw your shoes on and then run with the bike, and if you haven't done other ways, this is the safest way to do things. Make sure your helmet's on, even when you're running here, just so that when you jump on, you're ready to go. The other way is to have your shoes on your bike, and then you try to get your feet into them while you're riding, which should save you time. But every now and then, even with pros, this happens where these folks are trying to clip in, and they start wobbling a little, and the next person behind them hits them, and there are all sorts of cool videos out there of pros even smashing themselves up. If you do want to try this, I've done this before. It is faster. This is a good thing you need to practice it in like a parking lot or something like that. I would even put your bike on a trainer and just practice getting your feet in and out of the shoes in a situation where the bike can physically not fall over on you. Right? So again, you know what I'm talking about, like on the trainer, just reach down and clip your shoes, pedal, then put them back in. Right? So just get used to doing that if you're going to try this. Again, it'll shave off a little bit of time, but it can also add a lot of time if you screw up. I think some races are actually even encouraging people not to do this, like unless you're in the elite wave or something, just because people see it and they know practice it, and then they go jump on their bike and crash and take out a bunch of people behind it. I'm just going to throw the other transition. Usually T2 is actually pretty quick because you're just going to come in on the bike, as Tracy's demonstrating. You stop before the dismount line. You're going to have everything all laid out. Usually here I would have your running shoes, a race belt, and a hat. So you just slip your shoes on, you grab the race belt and hat, put them on as you're going out. So you can just clip them on. If you don't have a race belt, we have some back here for you. And you're ready to go on the run. So the T2 is usually pretty fast. You don't have to spend a lot of time on that one. There is a question too, do you use socks or not? So Personally, I like socks just because I think it actually makes T2 a lot faster because your feet slip right out of one shoe into the other. Some people go without. You also want to practice that if you're going to go without socks, especially for the run. Make sure that you don't get blisters with your shoes. The classic way to do that is just start running, do your run, and then take your socks off and do it like 5 minutes, and the next time do 10 minutes, and just kind of slowly build up your calluses on your feet. Or make sure you have shoes that will tolerate that. But I have tried it without socks. Aside from the calluses, what I just found was it was harder to get my shoes on and off. My feet just, especially if they're wet, would get stuck. And if I had the socks on there, they just slid right in.
Got it.
Yeah.
I see it on the one shot there. For those that do, and most of them probably will wear socks, that person on the left
Yeah, you
has
roll
them
them up.
rolled up to
Sure.
almost the
Yeah.
toes, so that it's easier to get your socks on.
Yeah, they slide
The
right
other
in.
thing with bike shoes and or running shoes is you can put a little either baby powder or something like that to
Mhm.
help slide them in, so you
Sure.
can, don't get
Yeah.
stuck at it. So it's a minuscule second, but it's
No, that's a good point. And actually, I had that up here too for
Yeah,
make sure you
tongue
got the tongue open.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially with your bike shoes, sometimes they got those Velcros on them. Make sure the Velcro is open all the way.
make sure it's wide open.
Wide
Yeah.
open, so
Yeah.
your foot will just slide right in. Yep.
Francis, are you saying to put the baby powder in your shoes?
Yeah.
In the shoes, yeah.
Okay.
So then it's you're sliding, whether it's bike shoes or others, and then it'll just slide in nice and smooth and quick.
Glide works good on the tongue too if you run barefoot.
Body glide. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the biking stuff. So the next thing here will be on pacing. And one thing, so triathlon, just like it wasn't a swim race, it's also not a bike race. So it doesn't, you can, the bike is the longest event, and you can set up yourself on if you have a good enough bike that you have enough of a lead that nobody else can catch you on the run. That would be ideal if you're a biker, right? So really get out there. But that said, it isn't a bike race, right? So there's no point killing yourself on the bike if you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to have a bad run, right? Because you still have to go and run afterwards. All right, so the first person off the bike is not necessarily going to win the race, right? They might give themselves, again, a good lead, or they're a really good runner. But you've got to know yourself and how hard you're pushing. It's also going to be different if you've done mountain bike racing or road bike racing. Triathletes ride differently. Some will say worse, but I'll just say differently. So the goal here is you want a really smooth, even output, and you want to be really efficient, and your goal is to stay down really aero. So once you get up above 15 miles an hour, your main thing that's going to be slowing you down when you're putting more effort into pedaling is going to be wind resistance, right? So the more aero you can get, the more that force you're putting in is going to make you go faster, right? And that's why these folks are all down in a nice aero position going along. Also, we're going to try to avoid surges. One problem, and we'll talk to you about riding hills here in just a second, but one thing you'll see is folks, I think, looking at their odometer too much, and they're riding along and they come up on a little hill and all of a sudden they're at 16 and they were doing 20, and so they start cranking harder to get their speed up to 20. And that's where Mike would tell you riding with a watt meter would make more sense because you're actually looking at the power you're putting out. But you want to try to avoid those surges, right? You don't really want to be pushing it hard up a hill and then feeling it later. Yeah.
In kind of going towards Mike's direction, like what kind of variation in wattage output is considered smooth?
That'd be Mike's question.
It depends. On a
That'd
perfectly
be my
flat
answer.
race, you want to be, we're talking maybe 5 watts over the whole race.
Okay.
On a hilly race, there's going to be quite a bit because you're actually going to push hard on the hills to gain some time back. So if you have a watt meter and you have like WKO or a tool, you can actually, they will rate your rides and basically be able to show you where you're spending too much energy and where you're not. But it can really depend on the course.
Okay, so it is all right to push a few more watts going up the hills.
Yes, you usually probably
Yeah,
be
you-
5% more or so,
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
because you save time going up the hill faster.
Right. But you don't want to kill
Not a
yourself.
ton, yeah.
You don't want to be just going all out to sprint up it.
Yep.
Another just good rule of thumb, and I was just trying to think of dumb things I've done in races. But I've had bike races, triathlons that I thought of as bike races, where you see some guy out in the front and you're like trying to catch him for miles, and you're just cranking up, and you're not gaining on him. you get into the transition, you get on your shoes, you start running, and you like pass him in the first 100 feet. You know, so he was a biker, and so don't try to necessarily pass people on the bike, right? I mean, bike hard. If you want to use them as a rabbit and try to catch them, that's great. But don't worry if you haven't caught them by the time you get to transition, right? A rule of thumb I see, if I can see somebody on the bike as we're coming into the transition, they're probably about a minute or maybe 2 minutes ahead of me. There's a pretty good chance I can catch them on the run, right? If you know you're a decent runner, if you have good T2 time, things like that. So don't be so worried that that guy's going to get to T2 before me, right? That shouldn't be the mindset. You want to ride your race. Again, it's fine to use them as a rabbit out there to catch them, but you don't want to be like this partway through the run because you went too hard on the bike.
What you're saying, because you said run your race, and that's something that I just read on the internet as far as the triathlon too, just recently, is pacing and knowing your pace. Because two things they found, a lot of people, they'll get out in a race environment and they might train hard, but they get in a race and then all of a sudden they push themselves harder and then they end up literally cramping because of the extra exertion, trying to push so hard. And then the other basic concept of pacing, know your pace that it should be on the bike, know what it should be on the run, and stay with your pace, because if you try to go too hard in the beginning, you're going to fade later on. You're going to lose it all.
Yep. You got to be honest with you, and that goes back to the goal setting part, right? You got to have your targets, and then train at them, and then even the harder part is race at them, not race faster than them. So a little bit on riding hills, and again, if you ride in Wisconsin, I think we bike a lot of. This is kind of classic rollers. This is actually the profile for Got Energy for the sprint race. So you can see it's not a flat bike course. These peaks are about 100 feet, which is not huge. It's not Grandad's, but it's probably like the first pitch on Grandad's, right? So these are respectively rolly riding. So the other key, I think, to biking is keeping your momentum up. And so there are a couple just kind of cute sayings over here, but one is crest then rest. So basically, you want to ride till you're to the top of the hill, and then over the crest of the hill, and even be riding pretty hard going down the backside until you get your speed up. Some people actually say keep pedaling hard the whole way down. If you want to take a break once you've hit probably 25 or 30 miles an hour, depending on your bike, you might not be going much faster. You can give your legs a little break. But just one way to look at this, I use this actually for roller skiing as well, is like on this hill here, if I was going this way on the hill, I wouldn't consider myself at crested until I could see all the way down the bottom of the hill, right? So I can see the whole road in front of me. So here I can see there's a lip, and then I see the line pick up down there. I wouldn't be over yet, right? So I'd still be biking hard right across the crest. And crest means all the way until you've started to feel like you've gotten your speed back up again. What a lot of people do is they'll get to the top, say, ooh, I'm at the top, and they'll sit back and relax, and they're losing a lot of momentum, right? All that momentum they had getting up the hill, they're not going down yet, right? And they're not up to speed yet going down. So you're actually, think of the hill as the hill really comes like to here, right? You have to push yourself well over it. Another thing that I see people do, and I saw this a lot in Ironman in Madison, because it's a fairly rolly course. I don't have the profile of it. But with people would stay in their big ring in the front, they think it's a triathlon. I'm going to try bike. I'm going to be in the big ring. So they're big ring, and then the littlest one over here, or biggest one over here. They're kind of all cross chained over. I use the little ring probably about a quarter of the race, right? So if I was starting to go up a little hill, I know I can spin at about 19 miles an hour or so on that bike with the little ring in the front. But that let me keep my cadence up, so it kept your legs spinning real fast instead of getting into this one. And again, everyone's bikes are geared differently, so you'll have to kind of play around with that. But I think the key is to try to keep that cadence up. Then the final thing is, again, if you're riding little rollers like this, you're going to come down, this is fun, I'm not working, right? But then all of a sudden you're going to go back up again, right? What you really want to try to do is carry your momentum from this hill through to this one. And so here, like right as you get towards the base, you're going to want to crank up, pedaling again, pedal nice and smoothly through the bottom, and then start to anticipate shifting those gears, right? So you don't want to get halfway up the hill and say, oh, I'm bogging down, right now I've got to shift. Anticipate that. Learn that hill's coming, and you're going to have to get your cadence back up, which means you're going to have to downshift to be able to do that and keep the momentum spin up over this one. There's a stretch of rollers out by Mindoro, kind of north of Holman on D. I don't know if you guys have ever ridden out there, but there are like 5 or 6 nice rollers in a row through there. And a good training workout I do through that is I'll go through, I'll look at my average on my bike, and then I'll try to make sure when I got done with those rollers I've got the same average. Right? That's a really good momentum carrying ride, because I'm going up a lot of little hills. The idea is you practice keeping your momentum up, going over the top, coming, maintain your speed coming down right up through, and just get good at really kind of just nice, smooth, even ride through those hills.
So you're saying same average speed before and going through?
Yeah, is when I got done. I won't be holding that same speed the whole way
Right.
through. It will be slower when I'm going up and faster when I'm going down. But I shouldn't lose any average speed going through those rollers, right? If I'm really keeping carrying my momentum through as much as I can. Because if you get a good downhill like this, and you really start biking and you're shifting right, that momentum will carry you pretty far up the next hill, right? And then you're just popping over the top. If I keep my momentum up over here, right? So it's again, it's a lot of just getting the feel for the bike. Anything, Mike? Anything else anybody want to add about biking?
One I read was following a blog site of an athlete a few years ago who was training for an Ironman, and her coach was telling her, and I think it depends on the individual athlete as far as cresting the hill and so on, not to be resting right away. And his advice to her was, if you're not going 25 miles per hour, you need to be pedaling.
Yeah, that's
So that
probably.
when you crest the hill to,
Yeah.
don't stop and rest until you're going at least 25.
Yeah, and that's again kind of what'll happen here. If I'm going down, if I can see the bottom of the hill here, I'm probably back up to where I'm spinning, right? So then you can coast once you get up there.
Yeah. Plus, when you crest a hill, it's actually very hard to keep power on the pedals since you're shifting up so fast. You actually look at a power meter, you have to work very hard to actually get up to speed efficiently each time.
It's a good skill to practice because you actually catch a lot of people there. In fact, on the Berkey when I ski, probably half the people I catch are just on the crests of the hills because it's the exact same thing skiing. They'll get to the top of the hill, that was Fire Tower Hill, right? And then they slow down, and if you just keep pushing across until gravity starts pulling you down, and then you can rest, right? Because now it won't matter if I'm skiing much harder or pedaling much harder once I hit 25, then you can just tuck and go, right? But don't do that until you're up to speed. Good. Okay. Another place that I think people lose momentum on the bike is cornering. And so what happens sometimes is if you're, this would be the red one here, they try to aim too early, and then they're going to momentum's going to swing them wide. In a green line here would be kind of like if you took a perfect, that's a parabola or whatever kind of arch that is, but they're going to go right across the apex right at the middle. So they're going to go from outside to outside. Again, you're kind of getting risky here on hitting the outside edge of the road over there. The way I like to do this, and I hadn't even realized I was doing that until I saw the picture, was kind of hug the outside, but then actually cut really sharply for the center. And what this does is you're going to do a sharp turn here, but then as you're aiming, you're actually going to be aiming a little past the apex. The apex will be the middle of the turn here. You're aiming a little bit past that, but since I'm going straighter here now, I can actually start powering up. You can start pedaling again. So instead of being locked in this long sloping turn where you can't pedal, you're going to swing wide, do a sharper turn, and then start pedaling again. So the amount of time you're not pedaling is going to be a lot shorter. I always just thought of it as powering up through the corner. So you kind of hit the corner and then just start powering up again. But if you think about it, it wouldn't work on this as well, right? In fact, I don't know how many of you know Brian Hubner. We were doing Got Energy a couple of years, well, probably one of them early on, and came around the high school there, and he was all sprawled out. Somebody was helping him, so I didn't ride off and leave him. But he'd basically gone around the corner and clipped the pedal. So he was trying to pedal through the corner, and that's an issue you run into. That's why these guys here aren't pedaling right when they're turning that sharp. You got your inside foot up. If you take this a little bit sharper turn here, you can get pedaling a little bit faster. And again, this is something you can practice. Practice maintaining your power through a corner. Again, bike racers are really good at this. They do this all the time. But I think triathletes, you can practice as well. The other question is, do you stay in your aero bars as you go through the corner? This is going to depend how sharp the corner is. I actually took the red path once in my aero bars at Castle Rock. I was going around a corner, thought, okay, this isn't so bad, I can stay in my aero bars, and I hit a bump or something and just straightened me up enough, and I went right off into the cornfield. And I was fortunate, I couldn't brake enough, but I got pumped the brakes a couple times, hit the cornfield, shifted down, and managed to pedal back out without coming off the bike. But I wouldn't recommend that. It was very exciting, we'll say. So again, what you'll need to decide is if you think you can hold the corner. If it's a sharp corner, like in a city block kind of thing, I would probably not do the aero bars unless you really know there's no other traffic around. You can swing pretty wide. If it's more of a county road and a curve or something like that, you can probably stay in the aero bars the whole way. But again, these are things I would practice. Passing, there's a little bit of strategy to passing on the bike, but it's mostly to not get caught drafting. So you're supposed to stay 3 bike lengths behind somebody. So again, if you're going to pass somebody, you ideally want to do it nice and smoothly. There are rules, I know USAT rules about how long you have to pass, and then you're supposed to come back over and all that. Mostly you just want to not be stuck behind somebody else. Sometimes you can't avoid it. Ironman's notorious for this, and just bikes just stacking up, 20 deep, and there's nowhere to go. It's like you try to get out of someone's draft and there's someone there. But on a smaller race, you shouldn't have that problem. On the run, and we'll get a little bit more into this is where we'll get a little more into strategy. Here you can there are advantages, or there are techniques to passing. You're not worried about drafting now. And really in the run, you want to actually, if you're going to pass somebody, so now we're racing people, right? I'm not worried about the clock and stuff. If this is a person that I want to beat, if I was this person, I'd hover right behind her for a second. If I am coming up faster, I would hover behind her for a second, kind of catch your breath, and then you want to do a nice, quick, decisive pass, right? The idea here is you want to pass them, and you want to go by them fast enough that they're not going to now just lock onto you and chase you, right? So you really want to pass them decisively. You could make the argument for doing that in the bike as well, although again, the bike, because of the drafting rules and everything, you shouldn't hover behind them for a second in their draft and then go. Right? That's where you'll get flagged. But ideally, again, even there, you probably do want to pass people fairly decisively if you can. A couple other just tricks. So now we're getting more. You can do this on the bike as well if you want. I think it's probably more important on the run. Hey, wait. So this would be judging time gaps. And for a long time, I used to hate out and back runs because you're basically seeing the same terrain the whole way. I understand now, having helped organize some races, they're great if you're organizing a race because it cuts the number of roads you have to maintain. You can double use aid stations and all that. But actually, I think they're also useful for a runner because they give you a good chance to check out the competition in terms of how far ahead of you are, and more importantly, how far behind you they are. So if there's somebody in front of you, you can obviously see them. You can look and see, like, they turn the corner, you look at your watch, you see when you turn the corner how much further were they ahead of you, right? Or if there aren't any corners, one that I found works really well are shadows. Like if they pass into a shadow, like in some trees, you can time it, and then when you hit the shadow, you time it yourself. And you get an idea how far behind you are. You do that a couple times, you get an idea if you're gaining on them or if they're pulling away from you. You can't tell about somebody behind you, so there, the turnaround, it's really handy. So if I'm in front here, I come up, I go around the turnaround, I check my time as I'm going by, I see the next person behind me, check my time and double it, and that's how much of a lead I have on them, right? So with out and backs, you can actually get an idea of who's chasing you, right? And you can also do that for somebody in front of you. If you saw them coming by you in front of you, again, check your time at the corner, and then double that, and that's how far ahead of you they are. Right. Okay, so the last little bit here is going to talk a little bit more about two other strategies, and then I'm just going to do two, if we have time, I'll do two quick little case stories. So there's some interesting, how many of you read that book, Born to Run? You guys seen that one? Okay, so you guys have heard of some of this stuff. So humans are basically born upright runners. So if we compare we can actually look at the hips and pelvis of a human, we can tell that they're oriented for us to walk like this instead of like this. This compared to our closest relatives like a gorilla, or if you look at monkeys, these guys being made to hang from trees. Nothing about running. All right, well, one of the questions was what's the advantage of this? So it turns out actually when you run upright, it actually slows us down quite a bit, right? There aren't many mammals that we can outrun, right? Cats, dogs, aardvarks, you name it, they can pretty much out sprint us in a short distance, right? Even hippos can run faster than a human, over a short distance. It turns out there were two advantages to this, actually three probably. One was by getting us upright like this, it actually made us better endurance runners. So we're not very fast, but we can go for a long time. We're also don't have fur, so we can sweat, so we don't overheat as well. Also, going upright freed up our hands, which allowed us to use tools. And the final thing that happened with humans, if we compare it to our ancestors, is our brains are really big. But the interesting thing was that walking upright, we can tell by looking at the hip bones here of Australopithecines, walking upright came before the larger brains. So the first of the changes that we associate with being human actually was walking upright. And it was probably for running. So actually the Australopithecines actually has a brain about the size of a chip, right? Whereas our brain is quite a bit, I think about 3 times larger. The other thing that's interesting, if you look up above here, it's kind of small, but if you look at calories burned per mile, so this isn't per time, this is distance. The blue line there is walking and the red line is running. So running takes more energy per mile if you're going slow, but if you extrapolated that blue line up, about when you get to 6 miles an hour or 10-minute miles, it actually becomes more efficient to run than it does to walk. And that line is actually fairly flat. All right, so once you get up into running, you can trot along for a long time without it really changing the amount of energy you're putting out per mile. Now, if you start going faster, you're going to do more miles per hour, so you're going to burn more calories per hour. Right? So that's where that math comes in. So it's a little puzzling to me when I first saw the line. But we're actually really good runners, right? What that flat line tells you is once we break into a trot or into a run at those speeds, we can just cook, right? It's not actually taking us any more calories per mile to zip along at that speed. All right, so we were born runners, and Australopithecines would have been too if they'd had shoes. Okay. Okay, so what does this tell us? So if we look back, again, here we've got our other apes and so forth, but here would be our Australopithecines. These are all the different human species here, so that would be our most recent ancestor were Neanderthals, who we also think were upright and actually probably could speak as well. There's some interesting evidence now that they had genes that would allow them to speak. But what the take-home message from this, why we're talking about this as runners, and I think why we're talking about this specifically with race strategy, is what we were evolved to do is to basically be running hunters. All right, so the way we made a living from probably about here on, so for about 4 million years, was we would run prey down in the heat of the day. We could sweat. They could outrun us for 100 yards, but we would say, oh, he's over there, and we just keep trucking along, and he'd run another 100 yards, and we'd keep trucking along. And basically, you would have teams, clans, tribes, however you want to think of them, of hunters running along with not very lethal weapons, right? You had a good enough brain to make a weapon, and you had to have the hands to use them, right? But these aren't your compound bow with razor expanding edges, exploding tips, and all that kind of stuff, right? You pretty much have to run this prey to the point where it's just going to stand there 10 feet from you panting, and then you would club it or spear it or shoot it with these bows and arrows, right? So basically, the human body is evolved as a lethal weapon, right? Not the lethal weapon, Chuck Norris, mad martial arts skills, but an endurance running, right? So what we did is we ran things down to exhaustion, right? And we chased things. That's how we did it, right? So I think really if we wanted to have a good paleo run, we'd grab a bucket of red paint, make a fake blood trail out through the woods, get teams of 4 or 5 guys with bows and arrows, or gals with bows and arrows. Every now and then something would pop up and they'd shoot it, right? Anybody want to do a paleo race? No? Say Mike. I figured Mike would be up for a paleo race. All right, that's actually really probably how we were for millions of years, right? And I think you can actually tap into that, all right? So the way I look at it for racing is you can be on offense or you can be on defense. So offense, actually, the persons in front of you, person you want to chase is in front of you. It sounds backwards, but you're behind, right? You're the predator. The prey is out in front of you. And so this would be Chris chasing down Jason here. So he's the fox and Jason's the rabbit. And basically, and I learned this back in high school, running cross country. If you were going to chase somebody down running, you just set your eyes on their back and just zone in on that person, and your legs will kind of carry you along, right? I think that's your natural predator instinct, right? You were designed to run things down, right? So if you're getting tired in a race and you see somebody out in front of you, just put your eyes right in the middle of their back and just don't think about anything else, right? And just let that person pull you along. And at that point, you just relax, right? Because that's what you were meant to do. You were meant to just run for miles until whatever's in front of you died of exhaustion. Sorry, Jason. He finished. I know he's still alive. All right. The flip side of that is if you're on defense. And so here now we're the hare, and this is somebody behind us on the run that we know is really fast. And I've been in both cases. And actually, I don't like being on defense. It's actually, I think, a lot scarier because you don't know what's behind you. You get this nasty little molecule here called adrenaline that gets rushing through your body. And what adrenaline does is increases your heart rate. It makes you sweat, makes your muscles tighten up. Basically, all things you don't want to have happen during a race. Right? So adrenaline actually works against you in a race. The only time I say that you want to have adrenaline kick in is when you can see the finish line. Right? And then you're in an all-out sprint. Then you want all the adrenaline you can muster at that moment. But until then, it's actually going to sap your strength. It's going to make things worse. So the key here is you have to try to relax, right? I know it's hard to tell that to the bunny, but you have to try to calm down. I basically do the math in my head. If I can like get a good time measure on whoever's behind me, you know, I know, okay, I'm 30 seconds ahead of them. We still have a mile and a half to go. If I can do a 6:30 pace, that means they're going to have to do a 6:10 pace to beat me. And if they can do that, they can win, but they're going to have to do it. Right? So I'm going to. The other thing is to, again, take advantage of your predator instincts, I think, and focus on things in front of you, right? Even if there's not a person in front of you, focus on a tree or a sign. Say, okay, I'm going to get to that sign, right? Try to take your mind off the things that are behind you, right? Again, I think this is actually harder. I think it's actually hard. This is not as natural for us. And I'll give you an example of that here now. So I was going to talk just quickly about two races, just to give you an example of how all this stuff goes together. So the first one, yeah, okay, this race, Door County. So I went up and did this with Barry Clark, who's, I don't know how many of you know him. He actually started the Bluffbusters tri-team years ago. And so he did the race the first year they had it, so I went up with him the second year they had it, and it sounded like fun. So we went up there and we had a good swim. I think they shortened it. I did the short course. We'd actually done Castle Rock the day before. So we did a sprint the day before, went up and did this race. And got out on the bike, and this was like the first time I got to follow the motorcycles. There's the motorcycle going along, and I'm biking along behind them. And so now I'm out in front, which means now I'm in defense. And this was an out and back bike, so we go around the corner, and there's Barry, and there's Brian Hubner, and there's Jason Weber, and like all these guys I know who are strong bikers right behind me. I'm like, whoa! Right. So I was basically like in defense mode. This is where I really try to calm myself down. Got into the transition area, started running, and I knew Brian was a really fast runner, and sure enough, about a mile later, he went flying by me. So I had to switch from defense to offense. I put my eyes on his back and said, okay, I'll see how long I can keep up with him. It was about 100 yards. And he was gone. So then you switch back to defense, right? So like, hey, who's the next guy behind me? So it was an out and back run, go around the corner, do the math, figure out how far behind you the next guy is. And the other thing you can check out is, who is it? I didn't know him, but he was like 20 something. I'm like, this isn't good, right? He's 20 years younger than me. I don't want to be next to him coming down the sprint in the finish line. So the next thing here, this is, you ever hear of things in the military they call PSYOPs? It's like psychological operations. Yeah, so it's using psychology to try to freak out your opponent. All right, so basically I got this 20-year-old about 30 seconds behind me. The thing you don't want to do here is be easy prey, right? You want to make it hard for the other person to beat you. Again, they might beat you, they might be faster than you, that's fine, but you're not going to make it easy for them. And so one of the things here, you ever seen those nature shows? They got the little springbucks jumping up and down all over the place, and people are always trying to figure out why are these are little antelope. They're jumping all over the place. jumping up and kicking, and they're like, well, why would they be doing this? I thought, well, maybe it was for mating. Well, it's not mating season. Well, what they finally figured out was there's a lion or a tiger or something over there watching them, and they're saying, well, look how energetic I am. You don't want to try to chase me, and you're going to waste all this energy, right? Go eat that lazy wildebeest over there, kind of thing. So what you want to be is the little bouncy springbuck, not the lazy-looking, easy target wildebeest. So you start basically pushing yourself a little harder. And so here, this is not me, just so you know. But this is where, again, some risk-taking comes in. So this is actually the finish line to Door County, and I don't know if you can tell, there's a long uphill here, and then the road turns. There are a bunch of trees here. Basically, what I convinced myself was that that corner up there, it's still about 100 yards from the finish line, was the finish line. Right, so I just said, okay, the finish line's at that corner, and I just started about a half mile before the end, which is a lot longer than I knew I could sprint, just start pushing. All right, so you basically are trying to psych the guy out behind you, saying he thinks, okay, if I start slowing down, that's going to actually embolden him. He's going to try catching me. So I'm going to put my burst in now and try to convince him that I'm not worth trying to catch and get him worrying about the guy behind him. And I actually got around this corner. As soon as I couldn't see him, I walked. So big, I was about dead. And as soon as he came around the corner, I sprinted the rest of the way in. So it was actually a very, very painful run. I was like focusing on blades of grass in front of me. Okay, just got to make for that blade of grass. But this was, again, this was risk-taking. This was not by the books or anything. This was, you're going to decide you're just going to throw everything on this one, and I could have blown up at the corner and had 3 guys pass me as I, hobbled in. Right, so this is, again, you're racing against other people when you do that kind of thing. And I think this one was, again, showing the alternating offense and defense. The other one would be the Ironman from 2 years ago. This one, again, was going to be primarily just to finish, but I know myself that I would get in there and start racing. But I did do some mental pictures on the swim and on the bike. I don't think I had any from the run because that just got bad. And it turns out here, and again, the people always remember, like the Apollo missions. They don't remember the ones that all worked and came back. They remember the ones where Houston, we have a problem. And I think that's where you learn things from, right? Kind of like the race before that one. So this one I actually didn't have a good nutrition plan. I tried eating solid food. I couldn't get myself to eat it. I was doing Cliff Bars. And so I ended up bonking at mile 18 on the run. And when you bonk, and this was like the total want to curl up under a tree and take a nap bonk, it's like the really bad one, you don't really have time to figure out what happened, but obviously I was out of energy. Well, so either was out of water, salt, or sugar, and you don't know which one, so you just do them all, and figure your body will figure out which one it needs. So about mile 18, I did that. That was basically Observatory Hill. I walked up that. And then when I got to the top of the hill, I made myself start running again. So I never stopped. I kept walking. But that run coming down Observatory Hill was probably the most painful run I've ever done. I mean, just getting yourself running again after bonking like that is really, really hard. But the key there is to not stop, to never quit moving, right? So walking is faster than standing. Jogging is faster than walking. Running's the best, if you can get back to that. But just keep going. So I had to do that. Then, of course, you eat all this crap, so you start cramping up. So about 3 miles of that. And about mile 23, I finally got back to race pace. In the last 3 miles, I actually just turned the watch off. I didn't even want to know what the time was, and I just started racing people. I'd look for a calf with my number on it and chase it down. And basically just went back to predator mode, or just kind of the default, right? You just find something in front of you and chase it down, and then as soon as you pass that one, you find the next one and chase it down. And that'll pull you through a lot, right? You can just, again, it's almost like a reflex, I think, for a runner, is to just do that. And again, if you're in a bad situation, I would fall back on something like that. All right, so hopefully there was at least one tip in there, or any questions on anything, or stories people like to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I got one question, I guess. When you were talking about more, I think, on training, you were talking about when you do brick runs, you talked about you like to do the first couple miles in a brick run at a very hard pace, and just basically not hard off the bike. Now, would you do that in a race, or would you get into race pace right away?
Yeah, so hard off the bike. So the question, so bricks, you bike then run. Basically, the first mile of the run, at least, I do at race pace. So hard getting off the bike actually in a brick would be my race pace. So it'd be the same pace I'd be running here.
So you basically in a race and you get off that and try to hold that thing.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And part of what I like about doing a brick that way is it gets your body used to that pace, so you just slip right into it. So it should just feel like I get off the bike and this is how I'm supposed to run. Now you don't do the whole workout like that, the whole brick workout, right? Because then it'd be like racing every week, which would be probably bad. But you just do a little bit of it, and again early on. I think that actually is pretty beneficial, as opposed to just getting off and jogging, which isn't what you're going to do in the race, most likely. Other questions or stories? I don't know if the stories are helpful. Case studies are never bad. Other thoughts, or people want to get outside while there's still sunlight? All right. I guess two last things. One last. I think Hannah's been putting up surveys on these. If you would give us some feedback on them, if you think they're helpful or not. We also talked about different models for it. So, like maybe next year, break up tri-camp into individual little activities, like a day of quick talk on swim and then swimming, then biking, then running, like different weeks, as opposed to all one weekend.
Yeah, there's a survey out for tri-camp right now. We
Yeah.
can go one out for this too. For
Sure.
everybody.
Yeah.
If you
Or
do have other suggestions.
Yeah, or if there are topics you'd like to hear, we try to give you kind of a basic theory of a bunch of stuff. And the final thing, if anybody wants to paddle a dragon boat in July, I'm looking to put together a dragon boat team for Cholita weekend. We need 18 paddlers, no skill required, just have to be able to listen to the drum beat and dragon boat, yeah.
I thought there was one for Gunderson for like breast cancer.
Yeah, it's a breast cancer, yeah.
Oh.
Yep. Well, what they've got is, I think they've just got like 2 boats and you take turns paddling it, because they're kind of big boats. But then, yeah, you get a team, it's actually 20 people. There'll be a drummer, a flag grabber, and then 18 paddlers, so 9 on each side.
It's an actual race though, isn't it?
Yeah, they time you. Yeah. So, but I think they've only got a couple boats, so there might be 2. Maybe they're going in heats or something. But they provide the boat. You don't have to make your own dragon boat. But I thought for endurance athletes with good upper body strength, it's a good core workout. It's for charity, and you get to check dragon boat off your bucket list. So.
And another thing that Scott mentioned earlier too, if you guys don't have a race belt, they're in the box back there on the table. So grab that. And then Travis, did you want to say anything about the kids' try that's coming up?
Sure, yeah. I'm the YMCA event director for the Kids Try and the Triathlon. So obviously everyone knows June 9th is the Forgotten Energy coming up. I brought some registration brochures if anyone wants that. And then July 13th is the Kids Try, and I brought some postcards too advertising that. Just if you have kids or know somebody with kids, maybe remind them or hand them a postcard. Just get some numbers up. So. And also, I think Tracy, you're going to send an email about getting help on Saturday, set up for the event, so kind of send out communication on that.
And then a big thank you to Scott and Mike for putting all these
sure.
together. They've been pretty awesome.
Well, thanks for coming out on a nice day. Be around if anyone's got any questions or anything.